Okay, we'll set this up, but I think we just saw the example of the differences between the North and South in Europe, right? So it's, you know, we've heard about it a lot, and we see, and you know, what happens between traveling the northern part of Europe and the southern part of Europe. But our daughter lives in Rome, has lived in Italy for 7 years, and now lives in Rome. So I know how hard it is to get around Rome, and the transportation system in Rome sucks, actually. It just does. I'm going to go quickly, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. You know, the technology applications on the vehicle and the safety validation process is pretty much the same for all companies. And why self-driving cars? And a friend from Volkswagen talked about sugar, which is sweet, and it really is kind of the sweet thing. But if you think about it for yourself, why are we so much in love with the idea of having a self-driving car? And I think it's all about freedom, right? I mean, freedom in lots of ways, but for the most part, the word that comes to my mind is freedom. The freedom from the stress of worrying about having to pay attention all the time. Driving is really stressful. In some ways, I think it gives you the freedom not to worry about having to be responsible for crashes. You know, my whole life is about 35 years of government service has all been in product and auto safety. So my focus has been about that. And you can see that there's, you know, 5.3 million crashes every year. Every 6 seconds there's a crash in the United States that happens, police-reported crash. Every 14 seconds somebody gets hurt in one of those crashes. So this is a huge public health problem for our nation. And this is the opportunity that we can't forget, right? So the freedom to relieve ourselves of some of the burden and have artificial intelligence do a better job than we can is really important to the world and really important to the United States. And, you know, this is just a list of a few things that we really can do much better on. Distracted driving, which is not well documented. These numbers aren't very statistically sound because there aren't good data to collect either drowsy or distracted data from. The pedestrian and bicycle data is solid. Let's see, is that a blank? Okay. Oops, maybe I'm hitting the wrong button. Okay, deaths. We talked about there are 32,000 deaths every year. And, you know, still today with 84% belt use, 52% of the people who die are unbelted, 54%. So it tells you how risky it is to go unbelted. And this is data from the DOT for 2012. Rita published this data this past year. 2.9 billion gallons of fuel are lost sitting in traffic every year. And 5.5 million hours are lost, productive hours. And when you multiply that out, the best estimate is $121 billion lost every year in the United States for congestion. That's huge. Small percentage increases mean lots of money. This isn't the United States, but, you know, Washington, where I've spent almost all of my life, is the worst traffic congestion in the country. We're sitting here in San Francisco with Los Angeles for the second and third worst traffic in the country. And so if we can do small things, you know, the federal highway folks are here, but we utilize so little of the highway effectively. And this is the mess that's created from it. So I do think that we can make a difference. And then, you know, the population. In 2010, the census said that there were 41.3 million people that were 65 years or older. And they're predicting 75% increase by the year 20, it should say 2030, not 2013. By then, I'll soon be in that group. But it's going to go to 72.7 million by that time. And, you know, so my dad's 90, my mother's 89. My dad doesn't drive anymore because she won't let him, but she still drives. And the day that her license gets taken by the DMV, they live out in the country on the farm where I was born, they will completely change their lives. They will lose their independence and their freedom to move, and their life will be different. This technology has the possibility of really changing it for my parents and for your generation too. So I think that this business of what we do for the elderly is a huge social problem. By 2030, the elderly population that is 65 and under, begins to go back down and goes back down to the level of 2010 by 2050. But for this peak and this bubble that's coming, it's huge. So this is a picture that's on my screensaver, and this is not my mother. My colleague from Google, who was on the front row here, asked me if this was my wife. And you know, since I moved to California 6 months ago, my wife's only here 1 week a month, but she doesn't look like that. So I told her that Anthony thought that this was my wife, and she got upset. But you can see what she's doing. She's holding these keys up, right? So she's gotten to keep her driver's license, and she's really smiling because if she hadn't passed the driver's test, she would have lost her freedom. The disabled. There are 56.7 million disabled people in the United States in 2010. 46% of them work. There's a huge percentage that are actually pretty severely disabled and still work. Many of them travel through government programs 2 hours each way through a system that transports them that sometimes, I know in Washington, is not very reliable. And so the transit system for the disabled is really sketchy. And here again, we have an opportunity to help the disabled. That's the promise of this technology. This is a video that Google made before I arrived, but this is Steve Mahan, who's here in California, not very far from, I think, Morgan Hill, who is 95% blind. And we did, Google did this as a vision, quote, vision of what they hope to accomplish, which is really full automation. I think that people like Steve can benefit dramatically from a technology like this. And the video is really to illustrate Google's vision for this technology. Someone asked me to talk about our safety program, so I put in the V slide for you know, the safety development process, which is sort of the traditional thing that lots of people have talked about. And you know, we're involved in you know, the development of the software and the perception and the planning and validation is a huge program at Google. And so we're doing what everybody else is doing that's working in this area. You know, we're developing and testing and verifying and retesting. This process will go on as we continue to develop the program. And I hope you can see this. And I don't think we've shown this publicly before, but this is the driver training program for Google. There are 13 levels of drivers that can actually get on the roads, in the public roads in California and drive. It is by design that there's a very rigorous process by which people get trained and certified and tested. And this is the kind of the process they go through: freeway training first, all the way up to the highest level of street surface training and instruction at level 13. The second thing I want to talk about is expectations. And this got talked about a little bit yesterday, but you know, the idea, I was in Detroit a few weeks ago, and there was a gentleman there who's very intelligent from a really great university, and he said, Google's being irresponsible for testing on public roads. They should get off of them because they're going to have a crash, and it's going to set the technology back a decade. So I went to see him when he finished that, and I said, this is hogwash. You know, you're really doing a disservice to this technology and to the American public by carrying this message. The message should be that we have to put out kind of realistic expectations of what this technology is going to achieve. I don't know exactly what those what that effectiveness level is going to be. None of us do because they're not done. But it's certainly going to be better than humans for sure. I'll give you some data. Like I showed you some data, but what I didn't tell you is that 30%, in 2011, 30% of the fatalities that occurred from impaired drivers. So there is huge potentials for these kinds of technologies, if done correctly, to have big benefits. So here's some things that saved more lives than anything else in the auto sector over the last 30 years. So seatbelts have saved almost 300,000 lives since they were implemented in 1975. They're about 45% effective in passenger cars, 50% effective. This is front seat fatalities in light trucks. Child seats, 71% effective for infants as 12 months or under. For toddlers up to age 3, they're 54% effective. saved about almost 10,000 lives since they've been developed and required in states. Frontal airbags, unbelted frontal crash fatalities are 14% improved because of seatbelts. Not a great effectiveness number, right? I think and if you're actually belted, that number goes down slightly to like 11%. But 35,000 people have been saved since 1987 with airbags. Electronic stability control, the sort of the proudest thing that I worked on in my entire 35-year career, because it is so elegant and it is so effective, right? You never really know it's there. You don't have to do anything. It just sort of automatically senses whether or not you're about to lose some control and takes over. 49% effective in single vehicle crash fatalities, but amazingly 72% effective in rollover crashes when the first crash event is a rollover. I know when we started planning for this work, at that time 3% of all the crashes were rollover crashes, but it represented a third, 10,000 of all of the fatalities, so huge risk. And probably the most important thing that's gone on in the auto safety area, and with great cooperation from the auto industry. So those are kind of some of the best things that have happened in the auto sector in the last few years, and sort of the shining examples of what high levels of effectiveness can look like. But what about what we're telling the public about the effectiveness of autonomous vehicles? It's not going to be 100%. Nothing is. But we should be setting some realistic expectations, and not by putting a number on it yet, because no one knows what that number should be, but saying, look, we believe strongly that we're going to save a lot of lives, prevent a lot of crashes. We're still working on getting this done, but understand it doesn't mean that there won't be any crashes. And I think we have to responsibly tell people that. And I think that that's been missing in the dialogue. We don't want to brag about the fact that there are going to be crashes, but we don't want to hide from the fact that it's just a realistic expectation. There is no silver bullet to this problem. That's it for me. Thank you.
Hi, Rhonda. Thanks so much. Really, thanks to Google for so many wonderful services that are coming out, not just in this domain. Obviously, tons of benefits coming. One concern that we haven't really addressed.
Speak into the mic, please.
Okay, one concern that hasn't really been addressed today or yesterday is that latent demand or that induced demand, that love of the vehicle that we already have, that crippling congestion that I think will still probably emerge if we don't price it right to incentivize those shared rides and those shared vehicles. And so I was wondering if Google's doing anything on that front, because I think you could have tremendous impact in the technology and the information for credit-based or some other form of congestion pricing at a minimum.
So the pricing issue is something we certainly think about at Google. Exactly what we're going to deploy and how we're going to deploy it is not certain yet. And the prices aren't certain, but we're aware that the prices are really important. And I think when we're finished, we're very hopeful that we'll do something that's affordable and effective. So
this is on-the-road pricing that I'm talking about, not vehicle pricing.
You mean you mean on-the-road pricing for service, or?
To avoid congestion, so that negative externality.
Congestion pricing, which is up to every state to decide as a government whether it wants to do it, and right. So congestion pricing is a matter of what happens in each state. I think the Federal Highway Administration has a lot of influence on policies like that, but. In Google, I think that we hope that small improvements can make big differences. So,
well, I encourage you and your super smart colleagues to look into that. So, right. In the vehicle and across the roadways, because I think you're one of the few companies that could manage that.
Thank you.
Hello, Paul Godsmark. The societal impacts and benefits could be so huge. It's really important for us to plan and put policies in place. Will Google give us as much warning as possible about when full unmanned driving will be capable?
Yes, I mean, I think what we can say is we're working really hard. You know, somebody said that we need some sort of magic. And one of the Volkswagen colleagues was sitting beside me and said, well, what's Google's magic? And I said, there's no magic. It's just very hard work. And so we're working really hard to do this. We won't release it until it's safe, and we're confident in its safety. But I think we, like all the other companies, are working very hard to make this a reality. And yeah, there'll be some announcement ahead of time that it's coming.
What is the Google business case? What do you want to sell? Software to automakers, or?
So we're not at the moment talking about how we're going to do it. We're still planning about what we're going to do and how we're going to make it available. I think what we're really concentrating on mostly is getting a system that's reliable and safe to work. So that's really our concentration. Our vision really is a fully autonomous car without the need for a driver. That's really our ultimate goal.
Hi, Dan Bartz with Booz Allen Hamilton. One of the safety technologies I didn't see you mention, but has been really important in the history of the automobile, was the requirement, I believe, in 1958 to go to dual-channel braking systems, having a redundant braking circuit. And I haven't seen a whole lot of talk. I've heard some conversation about it. I know one of the sessions talked about it, but what do you think the role of redundancy is, and whether or not there should be federal regulations regarding redundancy to get to the higher mean time between catastrophic failures? Yeah,
well, I think that there's certainly redundancy. You heard Bosch talk about redundancy today, and we think that redundancy or fail-safe operation is an important feature of a car like this or a vehicle like this. So we certainly are evaluating the needs for redundancies where they need to exist so you can make sure if there's a failure, you got to do it in a way that feels operationally safe.
Ryan, do we have time for another question? All right. Hi, Ron.
Hi.
Great presentation.
Oh, hi.
Nice to see you again.
You too.
We know each other. We heard from Emlet about V2V. Have you been talking about at all the intersection of the autonomous vehicle with V2V communications?
Yeah, so we have, and I think we've made it pretty clear that if it's available, we would use it, and we don't believe we need it in order to be effective, in order to have an autonomous vehicle. So there are certain things that will maybe make life a little easier, but we can certainly do it without it. That's our position. Yeah, yeah.
My question is very similar to the last one, which is we've heard a lot about the need for infrastructure that supports automation or very detailed maps. That we have to have all the detailed maps of exactly where the roadways are and the alignments are before we can have these highly automated vehicles. And I just want to know what Google's position is on that. I mean, can you do it without having all of that detailed
Yes, without the infrastructure. Having really detailed maps is a part of our program. So, but we don't have to have markings per se. We can find out where we are in the world with very detailed maps and other ways to localize. But the mapping is a really important component of that.
These detailed maps need to be transmitted wirelessly to the vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Is that scalable if you start talking about 80–90% of vehicles doing this?
Well, that's something we will be working on too, about how to make it more scalable, right? So we understand that's a need, and so right now, like I said, we're working on maps, but we're also working on the technology, and all of that will come together at some point.
Hi, Dan Peterson, Columbia. If I understand Adriano correctly, he indicated that we should basically skip the notion of licensing drivers, and it would seem the implication of that means that we really need to start with level 4 directly. Is that Google's position as well?
Well, Google is working toward that goal, right? Google's real focus and vision is for a level 4 vehicle, yes.
And skipping the other steps? Is that just something that's going to be a trap?
We don't know for sure. We haven't announced whether we're going to skip those steps or not, but we think that a lot of focus should be getting to level 4 as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Hello.
Hello. So I'm Ellen Partridge with the Department of Transportation. Are there regulatory or legal issues that would, or steps that states might take that would concern you, that you would really like to avoid?
Well, I think that we certainly want to make sure that, and I think the state, California is currently here working on a regulation, and you heard them say yesterday that they don't want to impede the technology, and so I think they're trying to very quickly understand how anything they may do could impede technology. So we certainly hope not, and our expectation is that sharing data and sharing information as appropriate with people that are regulating in this space will help them not do things that would impede the capability of a technology to emerge in the market in a safe way. Alan, yeah.
A slightly different way to ask that question. Is there legislation that you think can help you?
So I spent my whole life as a regulator, right? So 35 years as a regulator, and for the most part, regulatory agencies that have sort of sufficient legislative authority don't need any more help from legislators. That's kind of I'm talking now when I was back in a regulatory agency, and many special interests were trying to have their way with certain bills. So I think the thing we worry about most, perhaps, or one of the things we worry about, is that there'll be a patchwork of state legislation that would really make it difficult for operating continuously in the United States with the technology, imposing more strict requirements than we would have in certain other places would really be a difficult thing for everybody, I think.
Ron, thank you so much.
You're welcome.